Someone still cares because somewhere in the middle of everything, between the moments you questioned your own softness, between the nights you wondered if kindness even mattered in a world that sometimes feels numb, you chose to show love in its purest form. Not the kind of love that demands, wounds, or burdens. Not the kind of love that breaks a person slowly, piece by piece. You showed the kind of love that heals, the kind of love that stays gentle even when life isn't, the kind that whispers instead of shouts, comforts instead of controls, and understands instead of judges. You showed them that love isn't supposed to hurt, and that changed everything, because maybe they came from a past filled with sharp edges, where affection was taken back too quickly. Where every smile had a shadow behind it, where promises were weapons and tenderness was rationed like something scarce. Maybe they grew up believing that to be loved meant to shrink themselves, to tiptoe around someone else's anger, to apologize for existing too loudly or too softly. Maybe they had been taught by circumstances, by heartbreak, by people who didn't know better, that love was supposed to bruise, that care was supposed to suffocate, and that vulnerability was the doorway to pain. And then they met you. You didn't come with fireworks, with perfection, or with dramatic declarations. You came with something far more powerful: consistency. You came with patience. You came with gestures so small they might have gone unnoticed by someone who had never been starved of gentleness. But to someone who had only known the storms, your presence felt like sunlight breaking through thick, unending clouds. You may not even realize the magnitude of your influence because to you it felt natural: simple kindness, simple humanity, simple heart. But to them, it was revolutionary. Someone still cares because you reminded them that real love feels like coming home, not walking on glass. You reminded them that love can speak softly and still be strong, that it can give without losing itself, that it can hold space without controlling space. You reminded them that love can be warm, nurturing, patient, and kind, qualities they thought were myths or fantasies reserved for other people. Never for them. You reminded them that they are worthy of a love that does not wound. Maybe you didn't even try. Maybe you were just yourself, someone who listens fully when another speaks, someone who remembers the small details not because they're important but because the person is important, someone who shows up on days when no one else does, someone whose compassion stretches quietly, invisibly, into other lives like a light they didn't expect but desperately needed. You demonstrated something they had never seen in action before: love that doesn't demand suffering as proof. But here's something you may not realize: you changed their belief system. That is no small thing. You reshaped the way someone views connection, safety, and closeness. You helped rewrite a story that once said, "People always leave," or "Love always hurts," or "I must not be enough." By simply offering a different experience, you proved that new chapters are possible, that past wounds don't dictate future love, and that sometimes healing begins in the presence of a single person who chooses to love differently. Someone still cares because you gave them something rare: hope. Not the fleeting, fragile kind they had learned never to trust, but the grounded kind that grows slowly and quietly, rooted in everyday moments. The hope that they are not too broken to love or be loved. The hope that their softness isn't a weakness but a strength. The hope that relationships can be safe, steady, warm, and honest. The hope that they can breathe without fear in someone else's presence. You taught them that it is possible to be held without being harmed, to be valued without being used, to be heard without being silenced. And maybe, for the first time, they see themselves through kinder eyes because of you. Maybe they learn that their heart is worth protecting, not because it is fragile but because it is precious. Maybe they learn they don't have to run from affection, flinch at gentleness, or brace for impact. Maybe they learn they are lovable in ways they never imagined. Your presence did that. Your love did that, not because you rescued them or fixed them, you didn't. Healing is never about fixing. Healing is about reminding someone of who they were before life tried to convince them they were unworthy. Healing is about showing them what they deserved all along. Healing is about offering a safe space for them to rediscover parts of themselves they once buried. You didn't mend their wounds, you simply created an environment where their wounds could finally close. Someone still cares because you became proof that genuine love still exists. You became living evidence that affection doesn't have to be laced with fear, that care doesn't have to feel heavy, and that hearts don't have to ache to feel alive. You became the gentle reminder that they didn't even know they were waiting for, that being loved the right way doesn't hurt, it heals. What you offered will live in their heart long after the moment passes. Because when someone receives a kind of love they never knew existed, it doesn't disappear. It becomes part of them. It becomes a quiet echo inside them that says, maybe I do deserve better. Maybe tenderness is real. Maybe love can be good. It becomes a compass pointing them toward people, relationships, and experiences that align with that truth. And here's the beautiful thing, the love you gave them will ripple outward. It will shape the way they treat others, the way they offer comfort, the way they show up in someone else's life. They will carry your influence into their future connections, into their friendships, into the lives of people who will never know your name but will feel your impact through them. Healing spreads that way, through people who dare to love gently. You may not realize how deeply you touched their life. You may think you simply acted out of kindness, or empathy, or instinct. But someone out there wakes up each day believing in goodness again because you showed them what it looks like. Someone out there approaches relationships with a little less fear and a little more trust because you showed them they're not destined to be hurt. Someone out there smiles at themselves in the mirror with a little more worthiness because you reminded them of their value. They may never fully articulate the depth of what you did. Not because they don't want to, but because some gratitude lives beyond words. Some healing is too quiet, too sacred, too personal to express. But you should know this, the changes you created in them didn't fade. They didn't disappear. They took root. They shaped the new foundation of their emotional world, and maybe someone out there now loves themselves enough to choose better for their future because you were the proof they needed. Maybe someone now sets boundaries instead of accepting pain because you showed them love doesn't demand self-betrayal. Maybe someone now believes they are allowed to ask for kindness because you modeled what kindness feels like. Maybe someone now knows they are allowed to walk away from harm because you showed them love doesn't chain people to suffering. You became the turning point in their story, the quiet, unexpected plot shift they never saw coming. And every person who plays an important role in someone's healing journey becomes, in some way, unforgettable. Not because of grand gestures, but because of the way genuine love leaves traces in the soul. You remind them that love is not a battlefield, a competition, or a test. It is not conditional, not manipulative, not suffocating. It is not something that breaks a person down or makes them question their worth. You show them that love is a sanctuary, something soft to land on, something safe to rest in, something steady to trust, something that gives strength rather than steals it. And even if you don't realize it, someone out there carries your compassion like a small light in their heart. A light they didn't know they needed. A light that guides them forward. A light that tells them, love can feel like this. Love can be this gentle. Love can be this real. And because of you, they now know the difference between being loved and being hurt. They know what they deserve. Because of you, they now care again. About themselves. About the world. About the possibility of connection. About the idea that their heart is not meant to endure suffering in the name of love. Someone still cares, deeply, quietly, sincerely, because you reminded them that love is supposed to heal, not harm. And maybe the most beautiful part is this: you didn't lose anything by giving that kind of love. You didn't become weaker. You didn't become smaller. Kindness doesn't diminish the giver, it expands them. You became more yourself, more human, more open, more aligned with the truth that the world desperately needs more people like you. People who remind others of the softness they've forgotten. People who show others that love can be safe. People who carry light in a world that can sometimes feel dim. Your love did its work. It reached someone who needed it. It softened wounds, rewrote beliefs, opened doors, and rekindled hope. And whether you ever know the full extent of the impact or not, it lives on. Quietly. Powerfully. Gently. Someone still cares because you cared first. Someone still heals because you chose compassion. Someone still hopes because you showed them love isn't supposed to hurt. And because of that, because of you, the world is just a little softer, a little safer, and a little more filled with love that feels like peace instead of pain. Someone still cares because the version of love you offered didn't ask them to disappear. You didn't demand they become smaller so you could feel larger. You didn't dim their light so yours would shine brighter. You didn't punish their vulnerability or treat their trust like something disposable. Instead, you honored it. You held it with the kind of gentleness people only understand when they've once been handled roughly. You showed them that love, at its core, is not about ownership or control, it is about recognition. Seeing a person fully, without bending them into versions that make you comfortable. Loving them without clipping their wings. They care because you never asked them to trade parts of themselves just to be worthy. You gave them space to breathe, space to grow, space to show up exactly as they were, messy, unsure, healing, learning, imperfect yet deserving of every soft thing life has to offer. And in giving them that space, you helped them discover something they'd forgotten how to trust: their own voice, their own needs, their own tenderness, their own right to exist without apology. You made the unfamiliar feel familiar. You made safety feel possible. You made kindness feel natural. And for someone who had built walls around their heart high enough to touch the sky, your presence became a gentle reminder that walls were built out of fear, not truth. With you, they learned they could put down their armor, slowly, cautiously, but willingly. Because for the first time in a long time, they didn't feel like loving someone meant preparing for the next wound. You gave them the courage to hope again, not through promises but through presence. You didn't rush their healing or demand emotional perfection. You didn't ask them to pretend they weren't hurting or to hide the parts of themselves that were still learning how to trust the world. Instead, you walked beside them at their pace, making it clear that healing isn't linear, love isn't a race, and hearts are allowed to take the time they need. The way you cared became a soft place for their heart to land. The way you listened became a language of understanding they had always longed to hear. The way you stayed, even when they felt unworthy of being stayed for, became proof that they were never too much or too broken or too complicated to be loved deeply and gently. You didn't save them. But you gave them something even more valuable. You gave them the truth that they could save themselves. You offered love without limits, without fear, without demand, and it reminded them that their story didn't end with hurt. There was still more to write, more to feel, more to experience. There were still chapters where love felt warm and steady instead of sharp and unpredictable. Someone still cares because you shattered the belief that affection always comes with consequences. You helped them unlearn the idea that love must hurt to be real. You helped them understand that love doesn't require self-abandonment. Love doesn't keep score. Love doesn't punish honesty. Love doesn't make a person feel like a burden. Love doesn't need someone to earn their place through pain. With you, they learned that real love is compassionate, spacious, and forgiving. It allows two hearts to be flawed and still find comfort in each other. It understands that tenderness is a strength, not a weakness. It knows that caring for someone means supporting their growth, not restricting it. You became a mirror reflecting back to them the parts of themselves they never believed were beautiful. You reminded them of the innocence they thought they had lost. You reminded them that even if life had hardened them, softness was still within reach. You reminded them that healing is not about erasing scars but about learning that they no longer dictate a person's worth. Your presence allowed them to reconnect with emotions they had exiled, joy that didn't feel temporary, trust that didn't feel foolish, connection that didn't feel dangerous. And in rediscovering these feelings, they rediscovered themselves. Someone still cares because you treated their heart like something that deserved to be safe. You didn't make them chase love. You didn't make them beg for attention. You didn't pull them close only to push them away. You didn't use their vulnerability as leverage. You didn't weaponize silence or affection. Your care was steady, honest, and real. Your love spoke in actions louder than any promises could ever speak. It showed up on days when they doubted themselves, on days when the world felt heavy, on days when they felt like disappearing. You held space for their fear without feeding it, for their pain without amplifying it, for their hopes without crushing them. Because of you, they learned that love can be a comfort, not a cage. Because of you, they discovered that not everyone who enters their life will leave destruction behind. Because of you, they found the courage to let someone in again, cautiously, slowly, but willingly, and perhaps the reason they care now. The reason they carry you in their heart with such depth is because you didn't just change the way they feel, you changed the way they believe. You restored something sacred in them, something fragile but powerful. You restored their ability to trust that people can be good, that connections can be meaningful, and that love can be gentle enough to touch the parts of them that once trembled at the thought of affection. Your kindness didn't just soothe their wounds, it taught them how to treat themselves more gently. Your compassion didn't just uplift them, it reminded them they are worthy of joy. Your consistency didn't just reassure them, it became a foundation they never expected to find in another human being. They care because you made a difference. They care because you made their world softer. They care because you showed them that love can be a gift, not a gamble. They care because you walked into their life not to take, but to give, the one thing no one ever gave them without expecting something in return, safety, and though you may not realize it, the seeds of healing you planted in them continue to grow. They bloom in the way they speak to themselves now, in the way they approach new connections, in the way they no longer brace for heartbreak every time someone shows them affection. They bloom in the way they hope again, in the way they believe again, in the way they care again. Someone still cares because you changed the way their heart beats, not through intensity, but through gentleness. Not through passion that burns and fades, but through tenderness that stays. Not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent acts of love that built trust where walls once stood. Someone still cares because you reminded them that love isn't supposed to hurt, and now, they will never forget it.